Welcome, everyone. So I have my title has slightly changed here, and I'm going to change this so that it says show the thing for whoever's the main speaker here. And so I am one of the co-founders, and so I now also have the title Chief Science Officer, which I love. And so today we're going to talk about the importance of sleep. So one of the things that I want to say is that there are three building blocks for what we call lifestyle modification, and they are sleep, exercise, and diet. Intriguingly, in that order. And so it turns out that sleep is in fact the most important. And the reason that sleep is so completely important is that when we don't sleep, we are really having a problem with a lot of chronic diseases. So in this study that I found, it showed that sleep disorders are prevalent worldwide. There is possibly 50 to 70 million Americans that chronically experience sleep and wakefulness disorders. Sleep disorders are linked to adverse health outcomes, to safety problems, that's like as in car accidents, getting hurt because they're exhausted, economic loss due to loss of work, and then therefore quality of life. And James Moss, who's a leading researcher of sleep at Cornell, he's retired now, but he really did a lot of studies about sleep. We're going to talk about why insufficient sleep can be a precursor or a risk factor for diabetes and heart disease, obesity, depression, because it has so much hormonal impact. Back in the day when I was a student and Dr. Moss did a study, he showed that college students have the exact same brain scans as, interestingly, people who have narcolepsy. So I thought that was incredibly interesting. And so he's really talking about the importance of 7 to 8 hours of sleep, because without that, you do not have the right brain chemistry to function well during the day. So I thought that was so interesting that he showed that. So how are we going to support ourselves to have better sleep hygiene? What are all the things that are standing in the way of people being able to sleep through the night so that they can actually then be more awake during the day and have a better quality of life? So James Moss and others, and so one of my references on this is the Mayo Clinic. They have a really excellent whole section on this. And one is that you do have to sleep in a cool, dark room. Because there is a lot of background lights, if you have a lot of LED things, it's really important not to have those right next to the bed so that it is dark. And that has to do with the fact that your pineal gland, which is going to make melatonin for you, even with your eyes closed, does actually measure some ambient light in the background. There is also another incredible study that came out during COVID in 2020 showing that if we don't turn off our electronic devices at least 1 hour before bedtime, the blue light from the screen is going to actually destroy the serotonin. Now, the reason that matters is because serotonin is the neurochemical that's actually going to help us not be depressed. And serotonin has to be converted through, we're going to see, a vitamin-dependent, protein-dependent pathway to make melatonin. So that's kind of a double whammy there, because now we're going to be a bit depressed and we're not going to be able to fall asleep. So that's never great. And it is the presence of low light, as long as I have enough serotonin, that is the signal to convert serotonin to melatonin. And I cannot fall asleep if I don't have melatonin, because it's a hormone and we want to make it. So we're going to talk a lot about melatonin. I looked up to see what is the best time should you go to bed. And they were looking at the best sleep cycles for the majority of people. Now, this is not everyone, but for the majority of people, going to bed at 10 and getting up at 6 is ideal. And I will say, I was kind of going to bed at like 9 and trying to get up at 5. And I did notice after I read the study, I moved my alarm, changed it slightly to the 10 to 6. Sure enough, I noticed I am sleeping a little bit better. So I'm not really totally sure. It may be a Eastern acupuncture point, and I'm going to have to check on that. Maybe Dr. Carey, you can let me know. You can talk to your sweetheart. I can't in this moment remember exactly what 10 o'clock at night is. I know 1 to 3 in the morning we're going to talk about. And if we wake up 1 to 3, that's a liver meridian problem. But I should have looked that up before this. So if somebody can buzz in on that, that would be great. Why is 10 going to be better for most people compared to 9? But I thought it was interesting. Now, intriguingly, kids and older people do better if they move it earlier. So in Ithaca, where they know this data, they actually changed the early buses to be the elementary school children, and they made the later buses be the teenagers. It turns out that for teenagers and young adults, they actually do better in the 12 p.m. to 8 a.m. thing. And so school schedules is really a problem for teen sleeping. And teens and young adults who have that 8 a.m. class, that is why they can't pay attention at all. They really do seem to go back to bed later and do a little bit later. The key thing, however, is go to bed at the same time every day, get up the same time every day, Monday through Monday. So that means even on the weekend, you keep your schedule. This is a sleep hygiene thing, and the data on sleep hygiene and that consistent bedtime turns out to be very important to train your pineal gland and that circadian rhythm into your body, and you're just going to do better with your sleep hygiene. So what happens is that we have to support falling asleep. So we're going to talk about staying asleep as a totally different problem. But if the problem is falling asleep, you need adequate melatonin, you need adequate magnesium. Intriguingly, a ritual before you go to bed is highly effective. And we have to be cautious about what food's impact on staying asleep is, and also inability to fall asleep. So these are the topics that we're going to now talk about in order. The first one I really want to stress is this whole thing with melatonin. It turns out that I have to eat adequate protein, that's this right here, so that I can digest it to the amino acid tryptophan. That is a stomach acid impact. I have to have stomach acid. Now, stomach acid requires zinc. So we did a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I did drug-induced nutrient depletion. There are multiple things that deplete vitamins B1 and zinc and B6. So if I'm on a medication that depletes those, I'm going to have trouble making enough stomach acid. If I'm on an antacid, I'm on Tums, I'm on a proton pump inhibitor. Now I'm going to have trouble making enough tryptophan from the proteins by breaking them down from too little stomach acid. And we did the drug-induced nutrient depletion. We did what's called the baking soda test to see if whether I don't have enough stomach acid and I'm really missing the tryptophan. Now, the other thing is that tryptophan has to be converted to a thing called 5-hydroxytryptophan. 5-hydroxytryptophan is what there is a supplement out there that you can take, because 5-hydroxytryptophan is going to become serotonin, which then becomes melatonin. But to do this step needs a lot of vitamins and minerals. And so if I don't have folic acid, if I don't have enough iron, I'm a heavy menstruator, I don't have enough calcium in my diet, I don't have enough B vitamins. Again, here we see the magnesium, the vitamin C, the B6. All of these things are necessary on those steps. Now, I did see that if you, for whatever reason, are having way too much copper in your diet, not that easy to do, but if you did, it would interfere with this pathway. The other thing I wanted to say is that not only do I need these proteins here to make the tryptophan when I digest them from the stomach acid, I also need another amino acid called methionine. So again, I need the stomach acid, but methionine is highly dependent on magnesium. 80% of adult Americans are magnesium deficient. I have to make this called SAMe, or S-adenosyl methionine. And I also need this, B5 is pantothenic acid, or coenzyme A. And I need that to convert serotonin to melatonin. This is why the majority of us who maybe drink a little too much coffee or tea that is naturally a diuretic, or we just don't eat anything green, or we don't have enough nuts or chocolate, and we are magnesium deficient, we're going to have a lot of trouble, even in low light, even when we're relaxing. We're trying to do everything, but we have to actually methylate serotonin into melatonin. And so again, critically important to have adequate magnesium. So what foods do I need to eat that are going to support melatonin production? Well, proteins that are particularly high in tryptophan are turkey, eggs, all kinds of cow dairy. I can have yogurt, I could drink fluid milk, I could have cheese. Pumpkin, intriguingly, pumpkin and pumpkin seeds, really high in tryptophan. Quinoa, soy and buckwheat. Now, about soy, I would say do not eat non-organic soy. It has glyphosate or Roundup in it. Non-organic wheat, corn, soy, and oats now are loaded with Roundup. So we don't want that. But if you have organic soy, that does actually have tryptophan. If you are a vegetarian, then the pumpkin, the quinoa, the buckwheat, the soy. If you are a person who eats animal products, turkey for sure, eggs, and cow dairy all are high in tryptophan. Intriguingly, the #1 producer of serotonin is the gut. There is a book called Potatoes Not Prozac. And that is because when I stretch the intestines, then my intestinal response is to serotonin and help me have peristalsis. And so now I'm going to actually move the food through my intestines, and that will increase serotonin. It is truly a gut feeling. So having adequate fiber. On average, any cup of fruit or vegetables is about 5 grams. And that's why for women, it's strive for 5. So at 5 cups of fruits and vegetables, you would actually have 25 grams of fiber. But men need pretty much 9 cups. And so when I say to patients, well, have a potato, that would be 1. Then you could have a banana, so you have potassium, that would be 2. Maybe maybe berries, that'd be 3. And 2 cups of salad. When people are like, oh, how are you going to get to 5? I don't think it's quite that hard, but we have to sometimes really encourage people to eat enough fiber and to have fiber at every meal. And I need to have adequate vitamins and minerals. Yet, things like birth control pills and hormone replacement therapy deplete all the B vitamins. And so I'm going to need that likely in a multi, because I'm just not going to be able to get it without that. And if I'm on birth control pills or hormone replacement therapy, between 25 to 50 milligrams of vitamin B6 will be depleted to break down the hormones in the liver. And I like the active form of B6 for the majority of those women, which is pyridoxal 5-phosphate. I find if you take 25 to 50 milligrams per day in the morning of the pyridoxal 5-phosphate, it's going to let you do your biochemistry better all day long, and you're going to sleep better at night. And because birth control pills also deplete magnesium, do the B6 in the morning because it's a diuretic, and otherwise you're going to be up all night going to the bathroom, not good, that interferes with your sleep, and then take the magnesium at night. So why do we care that you fall asleep with the melatonin? It turns out that I found this really nice picture, actually Wikipedia, but I really liked it because I didn't want to use the Guyton and Hall reference, although I have a reference here about sleep and growth hormone. There's only 2 ways to make growth hormone, and that is to exercise or to sleep. So exercise is critically important, but sleep is very critical. Growth hormone is very important because growth hormone actually has really big effects right over here on bone, on muscle, on nerve, and on immune system. It is also anti-diabetic. So when I have growth hormone, I'm going to build better bone mass. I'm going to increase my muscle mass. This is going to increase my metabolic rate. My nervous system is going to repair. As I tell my students, when I'm learning something, I need to actually build axons. And when you are on the road, they usually do road construction at night when there's less traffic. That's what your brain does. I learned something during the day, but I'm going to put it actually in long-term memory when I have a good night's sleep, because I'm going to be able to build that axon right here in the nerves. I don't make new nerve cells, but I make new connections, and that's how I'm going to do it. Intriguingly, I also am going to burn fat. One of the best ways to burn fat is growth hormone. It spares the sugar for your brain and helps your muscle burn fat. I also, when I sleep, I'm going to increase thyroid stimulating hormone. And this is related to the way that thyroid stimulating hormone and growth hormone are working from your pituitary gland. And then, of course, I'm going to have melatonin, which is a very important antioxidant in the brain. And it's going to prevent the brain from degrading over time from oxidative damage. In other words, you won't be as burned out. I will also decrease cortisol when I have more sleep, which blocks my GLUT4 receptor in my muscle tissue. So I'm going to be much hungrier the next day because cortisol will not let the glucose or sugar into the muscle. So it's going to have some muscle pain. It's not getting fed. And my epinephrine and norepinephrine go down. I will not feel as stressed. I will be able to handle the day better. And when different things happen, I can. Does someone have a question?
I'm sorry.
No problem, Kath. All right. Now.
I need to turn off that volume.
Thank you. So what's interesting about sleep deprivation and sleep restriction is it increases your evening cortisol. You're going to know that you have increased evening cortisol when you're like, I need a cookie, because the glucose transporter into muscle is blocked by cortisol and it goes up more in the evening. This is going to want you to increase those late night sugar cravings, which then is going to interfere with you making growth hormone, because growth hormone is turned off by a hormone called somatostatin, which is made in a high sugar environment. So we have to actually not have a lot of sugar before we go to bed, because that will inhibit growth hormone's release. So that's an issue. For men, we really want to have the right amount of testosterone, because that helps us make muscle tissue. Even women need testosterone to make their muscle and have more muscle mass. And testosterone is right before estradiol. So both sexes have testosterone. But if I restrict my sleep, I'm getting 4 hours, 5 hours a night. Now I have too much cortisol. I'm going to have trouble having my muscle have good muscle mass. I'm going to have decreased testosterone, which lets me have a better ability to make muscle. And I'm going to have less of this called IGF-1, which stands for insulin-like growth factor 1. Growth hormone itself goes to adipose and lets you burn the fat. It goes to bone, muscle, nervous, and immune system. And it has this anti-diabetic effect, intriguingly, by keeping your blood sugar more even. However, when growth hormone goes to your liver, it makes this thing called insulin-like growth factor 1, which also goes to bone, muscle, nervous, and immune system. And so I get a twofer, one from the growth hormone and one from the liver. So both things are happening at the same time. African pygmies have growth hormone, but not IGF-1. So we cannot grow as tall, and we cannot have as much muscle mass if we don't have both growth hormone and IGF-1. When I want to talk more even about what else does melatonin do for me besides just falling asleep, it reduces skin aging. This is a picture of melatonin, which is a kind of cool molecule. I wanted to put it in there. So when we see people where they say, wow, you don't look as old as you are because you have good skin, that is a sign of sleep. When we have postmenopausal women and they're having trouble with their bone health, well, they need more than just calcium. They need sleep because growth hormone is going to increase the actual bone mineral deposition. And so that's going to create a much healthier bone when I have melatonin. I'm going to have a better immune system because it appears that melatonin, which is an antioxidant, particularly seems to help with decreasing the viral load. And when we think about COVID or SRV or the syncytial virus, all of those respiratory diseases, that we're going to be protected against more. And melatonin is going to mitigate the impact of Ritalin for children and adolescents and young adults with ADHD. ADHD is higher than it's ever been. And because the kids tend to have too much screen time, it's going to be very critical for the kids, especially kids with ADD, to have to turn their screens off. That literature is very, very clear because we cannot have them destroying their melatonin because then the Ritalin is going to have a lot of impact on their sleep to begin with. So they may actually need to have some extra melatonin before they go to bed to mitigate the Ritalin. So besides the Ritalin, which can impact the melatonin, what happens if I'm on other drugs? Corticosteroids, that's prednisone, or maybe even you have a rash and you're putting cortisone cream on you. If you're doing either of those, you're going to have to take some melatonin. I prefer only 1 milligram. You can take 1 to 3 milligrams. I don't think you should go over that. You want to force your body to make some melatonin, but corticosteroids, I'm on a cortisone cream or I'm on prednisone, going to have to take 1 milligram melatonin. Let's say that I've been injured and I have a lot of inflammation or I have joint pain and I'm doing non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, Aleve, naproxen, all those, they're going to deplete melatonin. Therefore, if you're taking ibuprofen during the day, and as a chiropractor, you cannot recommend to your patients to take or not take a drug. You just say, are you taking the drug? If you're taking the drug, then what you need to do is take 1 milligram melatonin. Then you don't have to worry about having the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. You're going to have the benefit of that without the side effects. What if you're on an SSRI? You would say, well, that seems good because you were depressed. We're going to give you some Prozac. That should help your sleep. But bizarrely, SSRIs deplete melatonin because we're actually keeping the serotonin up and the melatonin goes down. So now they may also need 1 milligram of melatonin. And a lot of people who have heart disease are on a beta blocker, and that also depletes melatonin. So any of these drugs, 1 milligram of melatonin, 30 minutes before you go to bed, really ideal. Studies show that it is safe at higher doses, but then you should take some time off. When I first learned about melatonin, they said 3 weeks on, 1 week off. But I have found that as long as you're taking the melatonin when you're on a medication, it does not seem to have a negative side effect over years of clinical practice. But again, I would try to use the smallest dose possible. And if you can get by without having to take the melatonin, that is always the best. The next thing that you need to be able to sleep is magnesium. The first reason is this right here called the NMDA receptor. People who have trouble falling asleep because they can't shut their brain off, they're having good sleep hygiene, they're having enough tryptophan, it looks like they're having melatonin, but they cannot calm their brain down. They're coulda, woulda, shoulda. They're redoing the whole day in their head. They're making their to-do lists. They can't take care of any of that. That is magnesium deficiency. In the NMDA receptor, magnesium sits here. It is the gatekeeper. When we make glutamate, the most excitatory neurotransmitter, and it binds to the glutamate receptor, that wakes us up. And if there's no magnesium, it's just going to happen more easily. So this is, we're a little bit hyper here. This is, I'm thinking all the time. Magnesium deficiency. Those people, the RDA for magnesium is 400 to 600 milligrams, but you can be depleted if you're on birth control pills or hormone replacement therapy, or you do a lot of coffee and tea or soda. That's going to deplete you. So now you're going to need to take that. And I would say, again, maybe a couple hours before you go to bed, have some magnesium, maybe 200, 300, 400 milligrams, depends on the patient. The only side effect of high dose magnesium is diarrhea. So if you get diarrhea, that's too much. Back up. Otherwise, no negative side effects to magnesium. So you want to really look at your bowel. How's your bowel doing? That's telling whether or not the magnesium is working. What happens also is that glutamate actually gets converted to this thing called GABA. And GABA binds to the GABA receptor, and that's what lets you calm down. So it's not that we don't want glutamate. It's that glutamate kind of wakes you up, but GABA lets you fall asleep. And so it's really interesting about how this whole thing works. I'm going to take the glutamate, I'm going to convert it to GABA. The GABA is going to hyperpolarize this postsynaptic membrane, allow chloride in, and calm it down. This GABA receptor is the one that benzodiazepines bind to. And these are the things that really downregulate you. This is where, say, the people who are like, I think I can fall asleep if I do one of those CBD gummies, it's binding to this receptor. I'm not saying that, I mean, it's legal now, but this particular pathway is also B vitamin dependent, as well as a B1 and B6 again. So we have to have those B vitamins in order to convert glutamate to GABA. So that's what's important about this slide, magnesium and the B vitamins, and then I can fall asleep. So here it is up close and personal. Here is glutamate, here is GABA. Wake me up, fall asleep. So I want to have this, but I want to be able to do this. This amino acid needs pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is depleted. This list is depleted. Birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy, and to some extent, the ADD medication. So you might have to add some extra B1, some extra B6, possibly as high as 25 to 50 milligrams if I'm on birth control pills, and the magnesium. And then this can use also some manganese, which it's really manganese. I'm saying magnesium, but this is manganese. And manganese is high in nuts and seeds. So I'm a big fan of low dose manganese. The literature, there was a great study saying that for those of us who tend to be, let's go back for a second, this glutamate dominant, we cannot shut our brain off. There is really good evidence that you need a ritual before you go to bed. And the ritual that appeared to work in the literature is make the list of all the things that you promise you're going to do the next day. Rather than wake up in the morning and make your to-do list, make your list and be like, and then do a ritual where you're saying, I'm going to put the work down. I promise I'll pick this up tomorrow. It seems counterintuitive, but I was at this really interesting retreat and I started doing this a long time ago. And I was at a religious retreat with monks. So it was very, very spiritual. It was really lovely. But the monks all said that this is what they did. They made a list. They promised God they would put their work down and they promised they would pick it up the next day. And there's something about telling yourself that it's okay to rest, that those of us who really are hard workers have trouble with, and we're going to wake up with the to-do list in the morning anyway. But I think it's really important. And that way, then your brain is not going over and over and you're worrying, which is a lack of serotonin, intriguingly. So depression and worry are both due to too low serotonins. So what are the impacts of food? Well, one thing is for many of us, we don't want to be doing caffeine afternoon. And the reason for that is twofold. One, caffeine acts like adrenaline, so it's going to kind of jazz you up. And secondly, to break down caffeine, to break down adrenaline, to break down, of all things, estrogen, which is so counterintuitive, that all needs an enzyme called catecholamine O-methyltransferase. What I love about that enzyme, because I know genetically I have a defect in that enzyme. So I'm that person who cannot have coffee and go to bed. Now, my daughter-in-law can have coffee and go to bed, no problem. Not me. I have an enzyme defect. I cannot break that down. That enzyme is a lithium-dependent, magnesium-dependent enzyme. And since caffeine naturally is going to deplete my magnesium, and I have the enzyme defect, I have to make sure I have enough lithium in my diet. Now, lithium, which we think about for people who are bipolar, what lithium comes in is it comes in potatoes, tomatoes, cabbage, and spring water. I find that intriguing. So I almost always have a potato for dinner. The reason I have a potato is twofold. One, I did a sweet potato tonight, has a lot of fiber in it. It's going to help me have enough good carbs, so I'm going to be able to stay asleep overnight because I've carb loaded. And it's high in potassium. It's going to make me more of a grape than a raisin. And it's high in lithium. Ergo, the book, Potatoes Not Prozac. Which group of people have the genetic defect where they have trouble breaking down caffeine, adrenaline, and estrogen? Anyone who's descended from the Vikings. That's the Irish, the English, all of Northern Europe, Northern France, Germany, Poland, that whole area. This is where the Vikings and the Celts were from. And back in the day, they survived and they took over the world. And so there's a whole batch of us who have that genetic background, and we tend to be a little bit more into fight or flight than someone who is a little bit more laid back. Yes, I know, it's very comical. So I heard somebody laugh there. So what I say, because I went to Cornell, that they don't even allow you in at Cornell if you don't have COMT. So maybe I'm wrong about my daughter-in-law since she has a Cornell degree. In any event, that's really interesting. Next thing, we want to finish any kind of heavy meal 3 hours before we go to bed. So we don't want to eat a heavy meal late. However, if we have trouble staying asleep, then we want to have a bowl of high fiber cereal. So we carb load before we go to bed, maybe an hour or so or 90 minutes before we go to bed, with either 2% cow's milk or almond milk or oat milk, anything like that. We don't want to drink skim cow's milk because it's not well digested. Almond milk naturally has more fat, and they put some fat in with the oats. So we want to have some fat with some fiber, with some protein. That's going to be a good idea. About 90 minutes. These are the people who are falling asleep but are waking up between 1 and 3 in the morning. If you wake up between 1 and 3 in the morning, that's liver meridian. You are actually having to burn fat in order to keep your blood sugar up. When you burn fat, you make 131 ATPs, that's your energy currency, compared to when you burn sugar when you only make 38. Now, 131 is great during the day. That's like getting paid $131 an hour. It's way better than getting paid $38 an hour. But when you want to sleep, you don't want to have 131 units of energy versus 38. You're going to wake up because you're hot and you are awake. And carb loading at dinner will make a big difference for that. This is the point of the day that you want a carb load. You want those potatoes, you want those vegetables there, and you maybe want some cereal with milk before you go to bed if you're really having trouble staying asleep. So I'm going to be done a little early because I kind of not sure why I'm going so good today, but I wanted to have a final tip and takeaway slide. There's two things we have to be concerned about: falling asleep and staying asleep. So what do we need to fall asleep? Sleep hygiene. Go to bed and get up the same time every day, and have a nighttime ritual. We want to have an environment where we make melatonin. To make melatonin, we need protein. That's 1.2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. So you can do the math. You take your ideal body weight, divide by 2.2, and multiply by 1.2. That's the amount of protein that you need. So we suggest between 20 to 30 grams of protein every single meal. For a woman my size, I do 30 grams 3 times a day. The bigger guys, you need more. We need vitamins B1, B6, and magnesium. If we're on birth control pills or hormone replacement therapy, or we drink a lot of caffeine, or we're on ADD medication, we're going to deplete all those. We're going to have to take extra. We want to turn our electronics off 1 hour before bed. And if we need to supplement, we want to take the lowest dose possible, about 30 minutes before we go to bed, of melatonin. We want to have foods high in magnesium, greens, nuts, chocolate. And if we do a supplement, we want to do between 400 and 600 milligrams a day, which is the RDA. We want to make up for that if we kind of know what we're doing during the day. If we can't stay asleep, we want to have a good quality carb. That's a high, that we do that carb fiber ratio. We take total grams of carbs, divide by fiber, make sure it's less than 10. Sugar grams, less than 10. We want to do that because remember, we want carbs, but not too much sugar, because sugar is going to turn off growth hormone, which is going to have us have a better night's sleep. And that looks like, on average, a bowl of high fiber cereal with some kind of milk. And do not have caffeine afternoon, or do a very heavy exercise late in the day. Doesn't mean no exercise. You go for a walk, totally great, but not heavy exercise late in the day where I'm going to get a little too jazzed up before I go to bed. So does anybody have any questions for me?